Hello and welcome to part 2 of my Lord of the Rings review. And today I'm covering book 2, which is the second half of the Fellowship of the Ring. And this takes off right where the last one left off. As all of these books have a very continuous nature, you can definitely tell it was written as one book and then later broken up, which is very different than most, episodic, whether it be trilogies or series like Harry Potter, that were planned to be parts, and you have clear start and end points for each of those individual stories. Whereas this one, there are what you could call clear end points, moments that make sense for it to be broken off into a second or third book, but it's still, there's never a beat missed, if you will. It's always moving and never resetting in any way. And so this one starts off with Frodo waking up in Rivendell after having been poisoned by one of the ring wraiths, one of their blades on top of Weathertop. And he's, recovered and healed and is reunited with Gandalf, who up until that point was missing from the adventure where he was supposed to meet the hobbits and Aragorn in Bree. And that's where one of the most interesting parts of book 2, and my favorite part probably, of the conversation between Gandalf and Saruman. The reason that Gandalf was held up is because he went to get wise counsel from Saruman on what to do about the ring. And come to find out, Saruman is in league with Sauron. No coincidence at all that their names are very similar. Sorry, I just got distracted by one of my cats in the window. What I found fascinating about their conversation, and I'll share some of it here in a little bit, but essentially the reason why Saruman turned is because he got too deep into studying the dark side. He became too entrenched with knowing the enemy's ways. What began as a curiosity turned into his own deception. And that is fascinating for multiple reasons. One of the things that I found interesting about that is that the actor who plays Saruman in the films, Christopher Lee, he was once asked about if he owned, all these occult books, because he was very familiar with the occult, as he, I believe, was in the Secret Service in Britain as part of his former career before becoming an actor. And he said essentially the same thing, that no, he doesn't own a bunch of occult books, because the more that you entrench yourself in those things, it does something to your soul spiritually. There is a degree to which knowing your adversary is wise to not be tricked by those schemes, but then there is a degree to where you spend so much of your time focusing on it that you forget what the real thing is, what goodness is. What's that example of like the dollar bill people who study counterfeit dollar bills? They don't study the counterfeit, they study the real thing to know the counterfeits. Here in the Tower of Orthanc, where Saruman and Gandalf have their confrontation of Saruman's change, he shares his perspective of, been taken by his own pride of wanting to have power over Middle-earth and join Sauron. He says, "And here you will stay, Gandalf the Grey, and rest from journeys, for I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors." Then Gandalf says, "I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors, and if he moved, they shimmered and changed hue, so that the eye was bewildered. I liked white better, I said. White, Saruman sneered. It serves as a beginning. White cloth may be dyed. The white page can be overwritten, and the white light can be broken. In which case it is no longer white, said Gandalf. And he that breaks the thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. I mean, just really beautiful takes. Is the core of, I think, what makes all the characters, even the evil, compelling in Lord of the Rings, because of how real it is. Because that is what you find in the occultic that are responsible for our governments, is this attempt to have complete knowledge of good and evil, and what that eventually leads to is a corruption of what the good was. So then Gandalf and Frodo and Aragorn and the hobbits, they meet with Elrond and a council of peoples from Middle-earth, dwarves and elves, to make a game plan of what to do with the ring. And they are left with two options, really. One is to hold on to it, to keep Sauron from getting it and having complete power with it, or to have a Hail Mary and take it to where it was formed and cast it into Mount Doom where it was originally formed. The first option was a losing option because Sauron already had greater forces than the peoples of Middle-earth. So that really left them only with option 2. So the council forms and they begin their quest, and this is where the story begins to really feel like pure mythology. When they start by trying to go up this mountain and they're overcome by the elements, the winter elements of snowfall, so they have to go a different route, which is Moria, a dwarf kingdom that had been taken and overrun by orcs. And so it was a choice of no alternatives, because that route had a lot of unknowns. And why I say this is the part of the story that feels like pure mythology is because of the monsters that they come across. Right before entering Moria, they are confronted by the Watcher, this tentacled beast that lurks in the water and ends up trapping them into the mines of Moria so that they have no choice after entering but to go forward. And then as they begin traveling through these mines, you have this sense, because of the way that Tolkien describes it, that there is something worse hidden in these dark ruins. And there is, as it happens, something worse. I couldn't help but think of Howard Shore's score in these moments, because there is a lot of description of these banging drums that the orcs use, and the banging drums that Howard Shore chose to use in the score were perfect for capturing the atmosphere that is described. And even the action sequence that they display in the film, even though it's not necessarily accurate to the way that the book chronicles that adventure, it perfectly captured that tone and atmosphere and tension that you feel as they are going from point A to point B to get out of the mines. And that last thing, that last monster that they have to face, is the Balrog. That whole sequence, tragic as it is awesome, to see Gandalf, this man-like figure, face off against this giant horned, fire-breathing monster and get the victory over him in the sense that the rest of the Fellowship is able to escape unscathed. One just displays the heroicism of Gandalf, and then gives you this emotional payoff, but not in the way that the movie does, to where you have the music and the slow motion and the tears on their faces, but in how they don't even have the time to process their emotions because they have to keep moving on to the next place because they are literally being hunted for in that moment. So they make it to Lothlorien, and again, a very rich, atmospheric place that speaks to this ancient, almost heavenly realm that is sorrowful because it is reminiscent of something that's been lost in this world. And this whole quest, it is something that is to fight for Middle Earth, for the preservation and survival of it. It's something to where God cannot intervene because it is not God's problem of creation. It is something of his free-willed creation's doing. So it is his free-willed creation's responsibility to now overcome and defeat the enemy. That was something in there that I was just reminded of, that is a very existential answer to a question that many people have of, why do bad things happen? Why does evil exist? I guess it doesn't necessarily answer it, but it does give reason as to why those problems aren't just solved for us. If you believe in free will and that we do have agency over our actions and decisions, then that would reasonably answer why we have to make the choice to choose good over evil. And even though you have a lot of solemn moments here, again, Tolkien very tastefully inserts moments of levity with Pippin oftentimes and Sam, and there's a lot of great zingers towards Pippin and his stupidity. And this has to be one of my favorite ones when they're getting ready to enter into Lothlorien and they're spending the night perched on trees. And, Pippin is talking and says, "I hope if I do go to sleep in the bird loft that I shan't roll off," he said. And then Sam says, "Once I do get to sleep, I shall go on sleeping, whether I roll off or no." And the less said, the sooner I'll drop off, if you take my meaning. Basically saying, shut up, Pippin. So they spend time in Lothlorien, and you get to meet Galadriel, and Frodo has his moment of temptation of giving the ring to her, just as he has his moment later on of temptation of giving the ring to Boromir, but he ultimately chooses the path of least resistance and in the end chooses to hold on to this ring and take it for himself and break away from the Fellowship, because it gets to a point where subtlety and stealth is going to be called for, and having a Fellowship of 8, it's just not going to be possible. But in his attempt to break off, Sam, being his loyal companion, doesn't allow him to get away, and tells him essentially that he's there to stay, and he's not going to go on this quest alone. And that's a beautiful sentiment of friendship, companionship, loyalty, and for anything that we do in this life, I think you can parallel that as two are better than one, because you can accomplish more and you can have each other's backs. So that's where this story leaves off, the Fellowship breaking off. You know, Boromir does have his moment of trying to take the ring from Frodo, or trying to at least deceive him into, or intimidate him rather, into taking the ring to his people of Gondor so that way they can use it to fight, which they've already discussed is a losing battle. And yeah, I look forward to getting into book 3 and see where our heroes take us next. So that's all for today. God bless, and hope to see you next time.